Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Well, we're happy to welcome as our guest on this, our second, it's almost first, Tom, because I combined a sacred marriage segment with Lisa talking about how the gospel affects her work as a mother and a wife and a neighbor, and sort of, crossed over, if you will. But now we've got you here to talk about the gospel at work. I want to let people know a little bit about you. One, for those of you who have been listening for some time, you'll remember that Tom was one of the folks that I had the pleasure of speaking well about on one of our Heroes segments some time ago. Those of you who have been attending online our Monday night Bible studies for the last several years will know this is the same Tom that I'm always talking to, and who's bringing the questions and is just faithful in being here. When he's not with us, Tom is busy as a teacher. He teaches at Portage Middle School. He is an 8th grade American history teacher. And so I've asked Tom if he would be willing to come on the program and unpack for us a little bit how he believes that the gospel has impacted him in a way that impacts his work. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, RC. It's an honor to be here.
Did you think it was a weird question when I asked you at the beginning?
No.
Okay.
I didn't think so. How the gospel impacts my approach to teaching in a public school setting is I'm reminded constantly, although at times, I have to stop and think about, am I really doing what I think, Jesus did when he was interacting with people?
Right.
And so you catch yourself and say, no, I really need to be more patient,
good,
more loving, more compassionate. And I teach in a setting where there are, it's more of an inner city urban type setting, and that's
okay.
The first time I'm about ready to conclude my 23rd year of teaching.
Wow!
And this place I'm about to finish my second year with Portage, and it's a great place to teach. But it's also the first place that I've actually had to deal or work in a setting that was really I hadn't had much, if any, exposure to, and so it's been a new challenge, but it's been a good one because it's opened my eyes to some things that, quite frankly, I've been blinded.
Well, and then you've got the additional burden of COVID and how that impacts. That's not something we're used to,
right?
You give me some background on some of the other places that you've taught. I know you taught in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I know you taught at another high school here in town.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I'm missing?
No. In most of my teaching had been at the high school level. So,
okay.
As far as the different high schools I've taught at, mainly they've been in suburbia. In some cases, very wealthy schools, and so this school is basically diametrically opposite socioeconomically and just in various ways, including academics.
Right.
Academics are not that strong and such. So, but I find that the challenge to try to say, these kids can be just as good as their counterparts
right.
in other schools.
Well, and you started off by talking about this patience. Mm-hmm. I know it's got to get tested in that work. It's never an easy thing. But I think it's a theme that's going to keep coming up in this series, that one of the things that the gospel does for us is it makes us increasingly aware of our own sin mm-hmm. and our own weakness and our own need for grace, mm-hmm. which then is supposed to translate into more patience and grace mm-hmm. given to others. I trust that when you're sort of watching the end result or the outflow of lives apart from Christ, that it's sort of at the very most there but for the grace of God go I, and at the very least, well, I need the same grace these folks need. Yeah. Do you have any sense of any consciousness in your students or with other faculty of any of that? And it's okay if you don't. It's kids are not all that astute at even looking at you like a human being, let alone saying how is he different from other human beings. But do you get any sort of feedback that way?
Like on the times when I think I may have been impatient, I'll have kids say, and I don't encourage this, but that they'll say, "Oh, you're so much nicer or kinder than this other teacher or that teacher." For example, because of COVID, we do virtual students this year, and one of the things I do to try to teach a basic skill that, believe it or not, a lot of these kids don't know. Whenever I say, I'll say "Good afternoon, so and so" in the chat, welcome. And then they'll say, "Hello, Mr. Graham. Hi, how are you?" And then I'll send back, "I'm doing fine. Thank you for returning the greeting."
Okay.
I'm trying to teach them how to, do little things like that they would need later on or use right now. And I try to things that I wouldn't have thought. And I like I said, I've had kids say, "You're nicer, you're kinder, you're." So there are some other things that come out that I was not aware of that was really they were picking up on.
Okay, so they're more astute than I'm giving them credit for.
Right, and several of my fellow teachers, they know I've been a little bit more open there with them, and even sometimes in my class setting, I'll say, I'm actively involved in the youth group at my church.
Right,
I work with these, and I'll sometimes use them as an illustration, especially as we're talking about things in general, and so that they know in general where I'm coming from, and just the standards I try to hold them to. If I hear certain words that I think are inappropriate, I'll say, you may talk that way elsewhere, but when you're in my presence, don't say those words.
Right.
Those kinds of things,
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I'm framing the question the way I am. It strikes me a couple things. One, there's a lot of rancor in the discussion about the public school system and Christians and where do we fit in and all of that. And there are people who seem to be, I would argue, a little bit defensive, who sort of want to take the position that everybody from the superintendent down to the janitor is a gold star Sunday school every week person, and then other people closer to my position taking the view that they're all fire-breathing monsters with horns and cloven hoofs.
Right.
And it's somewhere in between, isn't it?
It is.
But one of the things that concerns me about Christians who are in the situation you're in, not that there's not a value in instilling virtue in them, but it's very easy to say, well, what I have room to do is kind of try to instill morals in these kids and feel like, well, that's my witness. When I would argue, no, your witness is when you're repenting to the students, when you're saying, hey, I did lose my temper, will you forgive me? When you're acknowledging your need for grace, when you are even maybe, I don't know if you'd have this kind of room, but even talking personally about, hey, I feel that burden, I feel that weight and that need for forgiveness because I know I've got weaknesses, and even while I'm scolding you, Susie, or while I'm scolding you, Bobby, I want you to know that I'm coming from a person trying to help you, not someone who's coming saying I'm so far above you at all. I mean, is there is there a consciousness of, hey, it's not just my job to teach these kids history and help them become better behaved, but as a believer, I want them to see something beyond that?
Yes, I've had several opportunities over the years where I have messed up, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry." In some cases, I've even said, "I want to apologize to you. Will you forgive me? And can we move forward?" I'll say it like that. Just the other day, a young man who was not very kind and called me certain names, and I kept talking to him, and he said, "Why are you still talking to me for?" He just wanted me to back off, and I said, "Because I care about you."
But that was,
of course, he just blew that off. But several of the kids are standing because it's just before we're about ready to leave.
Okay,
and this whole little episode takes place, and I just let him know that I said if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't be on your case. I said I care about you, but that's why I'm on your case, is because I care about you.
Right.
And I'm not the only teacher. He's had issues with others, so
right.
I'm hoping that I can at least say, that this is where I stand and this is what I want to do. And the driving force, if I may say, is the thing that's driven me. And I remember it better at other times than I do in other situations. Is I believe it's out of Matthew 7. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, those of you who love, this person or that person, even the tax collectors and the pagans do that.
Yeah, that's easy.
And so, that's my driving force. I have to love the unlovable. I have to be willing to touch, maybe not a physical touch, but touch the untouchable. I have to be able to reach those who sense that they are, maybe outcasts. The big thing is the gender dysphoria. I've got quite a few kids in that setting, and I go out of my way to make sure I treat them like a human being,
right, and
be respectful of them,
right,
and let them know I care about them. And so, and in that way, that has allowed me, I think, to have an audience at times with them.
There is a there's a faux version of grace where we're supposed to never say anything wrong or disagree. There is a faux version of courage where we yell and scream and have spit coming out of our mouth. But I notice, and of course, I have a whole lot more freedom teaching in a college situation, and I've said that to my students. I've said, you're used to being in a high school, and I wouldn't be allowed to do this in your high school. But I'm going to tell you about Jesus, and I'll tell you. And also because they're in college, I'm much more comfortable challenging the things that they're saying, and what I found is that if you can it's really not that difficult. It is difficult to keep everyone from getting mad, but it's not that difficult to keep your conscience clean in the sense of, hey, I'm challenging the idea, and the person behind the idea, I am for you. I am trying to help you. I'm trying to bless you. When we finish this argument, even if neither one of us budges, you're still my friend. You're still my student. I still care about you, and I think there's something there that's important. Again, different from evangelism, different from I want to teach you to be more moral, but nevertheless an impact of the gospel. And that's part of what led me to do this series, was thinking about, and I mentioned this when I had Lisa on, the Bible, one of the epistles talks about the death and resurrection of Jesus being a blessing to all people. And in the context, it's clearly not saying because it makes salvation possible. It's clearly not saying because it gives salvation to everyone. But it is saying, in fact, the reason it says it because it's that Jesus blesses everyone, especially those who believe. So it's two different kinds of blessings,
right?
And one of those blessings is because I have been blessed with peace with the living God. I don't have to struggle for approval. I don't have to feel the need to change everybody. I can love the unlovable, touch the untouchable, as you said.
And that's really where God's been bringing me. I just, as you're sharing there, I remembered earlier this year, was one of the things I tried to teach my students. I said that there's at least two sides to every story. And I said, and as we teach them to do research, looking at certain websites, the abortion issue came up.
Okay.
And I had some students who were very much, it was a woman's right,
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I respectfully disagree, and here's why. I said,
Mm-hmm.
I do believe abortion's murder.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, someone, the unborn cannot speak for themselves, so someone has to speak up for them.
Mm-hmm.
And, we obviously came to an impasse, but I respected their position. They could see that I respected them. They also, I could tell, respected my position. So you can take advantage of those opportunities, especially in a subject like history, because history is a messy subject.
Yes, it is.
You can't get you have to deal with life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that I found that works, I'm not always perfect at it, but, and in fact, you mentioned the abortion issue is what brought it to mind. I get little written essays in defense of this, and one of the simple ways that I respond is, what makes you think that?
Mm-hmm.
What, it's not a baby. Oh, well, why do you say that? Mm-hmm. Tell me, what is your standard for what is a baby and what is not a baby, and why or a woman has a right. My dad, in dealing with that, he used to say, if the issue that we're talking about is whether or not Roe v. Wade is appropriate law, you can't say yes it is by appealing to Roe v. Wade. That's called begging the question. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about, is there such a right, and you say, well, there is a right, well, where did it come from? Did it come from... It can't come from Washington, and I'm pretty sure God doesn't give it. So where does it come from? So, well, we are out of time, Tom, but I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to look forward to heading upstairs and starting our Bible study
I'm looking
in a
forward
few
to it,
minutes,
too.
and I hope you'll come and be a guest again.
I look forward to it.
All right, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, RC.
One of the most common complaints against the doctrine of unconditional election is that it seems to make God out to be capricious. The late, great Dr. John Gerstner, in trying to emphasize the sovereign grace of God in election, once with his tongue firmly planted in his cheek, described that moment before time when we were chosen as, quote, our lucky day. The reformers, however, in arguing for unconditional election, were dealing with a particular argument from the other side. That is, they were more interested in denying something than they were in affirming something. The driving motive here was to make sure we understood that election is not done on the basis of any good in those who were chosen. There were no meritorious conditions in the elect or by the elect that motivated God to make them the elect. He did not peer down the corridor of time to find out which of us were good enough to choose him, and then on that basis choose us. Total depravity, of course, is more than sufficient to undo that notion. If God peered down the corridor of time to see who would of themselves choose him, then none would be elect. That God looked for nothing good in us before he chose us, however, does not mean that he looked for nothing at all. The goal of the doctrine is not neutrality, but humility. If we look to God's Word, we find that God just may have used a particular criteria in choosing us. Paul writes about God choosing his people, quote, "For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are. That's us. Were we more honest, we would give up our dignified church names like Covenant Church, First Church, Trinity Church, and adopt more honesty in our labeling. We ought to tell our neighbors, we worship each Lord's Day with the saints down at First Church of the Ignoble. We ought to put bumper stickers on our cars advising, follow me to base and despised community fellowship. God did indeed have a reason for choosing you and me. He wanted to choose losers. Does the church acknowledge this painful reality? Do we embrace our inner loser? No. He chooses us because we are fools, and we, because he is right, think ourselves wise. We come up with elaborate marketing strategies for the kingdom of God. We divide up the congregation by market tastes, setting up the hip, urbane, fancy coffee gathering place over here, and the country western Mountain Dew drinking place over there. We'll serve this group lattes and the other group biscuits and gravy. And we'll send the satellite feed of Pastor Sweater to both of them. He, that is God, chooses us in our weakness, and we start flexing our political muscles. He chooses us in our lack of nobility, and we pat him on the back for choosing such fine fellows such as we are. This, of course, is one more reason, as if we need another, why it is wise to come together at the table each Lord's Day. How can we go on thinking so highly of ourselves if each week we see the body we broke and the blood we shed? How can we persuade ourselves of how much the kingdom of God needs us when we need our captain not just to provide for us, but to feed us with his own body? How can we perceive ourselves to be a net gain for the body when we cannot stay alive without the body? The table, for all the joy and delight that it brings, powerfully reminds us of who we are: the weak, the foolish, the ignoble. Why would God choose losers like us? Is it because of his compassion? Was it sympathy that drove him to overlook the stronger, wiser, nobler of his creatures? No, the text tells us how God reasoned this out: that no flesh should glory in his presence. God's motive for picking us is the same motive for all that he does, that his glory might be made known. When we preen about, thinking too highly of ourselves, therefore we're not merely showing our foolishness, but misunderstanding ourselves, such that we fall under the very curse of Malachi. Will a man rob God? A failure of humility is a failure to render unto God the things that are His. Glory. We're not, by the way, fooling anyone anyway. The world knows what losers we are. God knows what losers we are. Losers that we are, we're the only ones that don't seem to notice. We're too busy trying to impress each other. May God have mercy on our souls. The answer, of course, isn't to get all puddle-glum about ourselves. That we are losers isn't cause for mourning, but for rejoicing. We should move not only from grace to grace, but from shocked to stunned. Me? He chose me? But I'm awful. I'm a bundle of dust and rebellion. What did He conceivably see in me? Well, how do we answer the question? What did He see in us? What He saw in us, friends, was this, that we are losers so awful that He is our only way out. He saw in us an opportunity to make known His glory, to shine forth the riches of His grace by bestowing them upon us, the poverty-stricken. We now have no more reason to pretend. We need not anymore put on a show for others. The only thing we need to do is to repent and believe. And having believed, all we have left to do is rejoice and give thanks. Friends, we are losers, every one of us. But by His grace and for His glory, we are His losers. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.